Welcome to an episode of InRange. I'm coming to you today with some fascinating firearms history that honestly still really reverberates today. Not necessarily the exact patents and laws, but the realities of the firearms industry now and the realities of the firearms industry in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s were really no different. Another thing about this that I really enjoy bringing to the channel is I'm personally very fascinated with the period between percussion revolvers and when dedicated cartridge revolvers are made, and there's this interesting moment where a lot of ingenuity and attempts to design cartridge conversions existed. And we see all sorts of cartridge conversions in the private sector, meaning people, blacksmiths trying to make or doing cartridge conversions just in their local village. And we also see factory cartridge conversions. And a lot of this came about from the glut and a large amount of post-Civil War firearms that were in the hands of people wanting to make them modern with cartridges and not necessarily buy a new gun. We also see companies having a large amount of inventory of guns that were designed as percussion revolvers and wanting to make them now modern with cartridge revolvers. And we see, of course, the benefits of cartridges over just standard loose ball, powder, and percussion caps, or even paper cartridges. But really all of this starts with a big fight over law and patents. And there was a man named Rollin White who worked for Colt Manufacturing, and he quit. I believe it was 1854. And briefly after quitting, he filed for and was granted 5 patents. The most important one was the concept of a bored-through cylinder for breech-loading cartridges. And after he got that patent, he went back to Colt, the company he used to work for, and offered them a licensing fee for them to license his concept and make essentially the first commercially manufactured breech-loading revolvers. Colt turned him down. So then he went to Smith Wesson, who did accept his offer, and they licensed his patent to manufacture really not the first breech-loading cartridge revolver, but the first really successful production one in the 1860s. And it was the Smith Wesson 1.5 tip-up. It was used in the Civil War as a backup piece. Many men had one of these in a boot or in their pocket, and it was chambered in the impotent, by modern standards, 22 short. But you know what it was? It was a breech-loading cartridge revolver. An unusual one, in that you would open it from the top, from the front, pull out the cylinder, load your rounds, put the cylinder back in and close it. But regardless, what this was still much easier and faster to reload than a cap and ball revolver, and the cartridges in your pocket were less susceptible to the weather and elements. So this was very successful. They continued to make other cartridge revolvers. They made the .32 caliber version of this and other ones as well. And while Smith & Wesson had essentially the license to Rollin White's patent, they had a stranglehold on the industry in terms of modern production of revolvers. This meant that Colt was still stuck with manufacturing percussion revolvers. But all was not lost, and they decided that they wanted to find a way to have cartridge revolvers in the industry without violating the Rollin White patent. So that's what we have here, and this is an interesting example of something that was provided to me to be able to do this video with. And this weapon, or this revolver, is very unusual in its own right, and we'll get to that more later in the video. But what we have here is essentially a Thuer conversion cylinder and ring, but the gun itself is a standard Colt 1851 Navy. 36 caliber, cap and ball, percussion powder ball. And all you had to do, and what was unusual and interesting about the Thuer conversion, was you just put in the cylinder and the conversion ring onto any standard 1851, or for that matter, they made Thuer conversions for almost all of the Colts that were in production, and boom, you were a cartridge revolver. All right, so we have the 1851 Navy in the standard percussion configuration. But let's flip it over to the Thuer conversion for cartridges. Just push out the wedge, as you would normally. Pull the barrel off. So you take your percussion cylinder off. You can see the Thuer conversion is the same cylinder that's just been cut down. You put your conversion ring on, which has the firing pin in it. Install that onto the gun. Half cock that. Make sure it's seated like that. Put your barrel back on. There it is. And you are now ready to use Thuer cartridges. That's it. When you want to go back to percussion, pull out the wedge, put the percussion cylinder back on, and you're back in action. Okay, so now the Thuer conversion ring is interesting. This isn't exactly a perfect Thuer reproduction. We'll talk about that more later. But once you load all 6 chambers, you actually have a safety area here where you can put the hammer down and you can't fire the gun. This makes it safe to carry. Original real Thuers had a spring here, and when you cocked the hammer, it would automatically spring to the firing pin. This one is manual. This is a reproduction, but a very interesting one. We'll get to that more later, but this is a good gun to talk about Thuer conversions. So you would put it on the safe condition, all 6 chambers loaded. When you cock the hammer, it would go twink, and you'd have the firing pin exposed to shoot. On this one, again, like I said, you have to do it manually. So with the gun in the safe position and on half cock, here's where the Thuer was so interesting and didn't violate the Rollin White patent. These Thuer cartridges were essentially conical in shape, just like paper cartridges were, and you would load them from the front. So you insert the Thuer cartridge, index it with the loading rod, and ram it just like you would a traditional paper cartridge with a muzzle loader. And you would do that for all 6 chambers. Now the Thuer cartridge was sort of forward-leaning in that it had a center fire standard primer as part of the cartridge. Load all 6, seating it like this would cause it by friction fit to stay in the chamber. Put the hammer down on the safe position, and you're loaded with 6 Thuer cartridges ready to go. And when you were done with all 6, you would put the Thuer to its ejection ring, which I do not have. I do not have the ejection setting on this reproduction. And to eject the cartridges, you would literally dry fire it on the chamber, and the cartridge case would literally eject out the front. Now this is one of the deficiencies of the Thuer, and Colt themselves said that sometimes you'd have to do this more than once to eject the cartridge. But at that point, you had your 6 brass cases in your hand, and this gun even came with reloading tools that you would actually use the gun itself to reload your Thuer cartridges. So you could reload a pocket full of Thuer cartridges in the field, no problem whatsoever, because it was center fire and the way it was designed. Let's go ahead and shoot this a little. All right, we're out here to shoot the Thuer conversion. You'll see that it's in the safe condition. The hammer's down on the safety notch of the conversion ring. So to fire the gun, we have to put it either on half cock or full cock, and then move the conversion ring to expose the firing pin, at which point we're ready to fire. So let's go ahead and do it. So as you can see, I've included some photos I found on the internet as reference material, kind of all over the place. They're not from any specifically one site. It's hard to find any footage or any pictures for that matter of an actual Thuer being fired with Thuer cartridges. So that's why I jumped on this, because this is an interesting conversion piece in and of itself. Yes, it's a reproduction, and it's ironically not even chambered in the Thuer cartridge, which by the way you can't get, which is why it's not. This is chambered in 38 rimfire, which in terms of projectile, powder, and power is identical to the Thuer cartridge. But even though this is a Thuer simulant in terms of a Thuer conversion, it still loads from the breech, which of course would have violated the Rollin White patent. But in terms of firing a Thuer style conversion, at least aesthetically in terms of most of the handling, this is a 38 rimfire that does that. Now, 38 rimfire, of course, is far much more accessible than Thuer cartridges, which is a joke because 38 rimfire in and of itself is a problem, and I had to acquire a reloading kit from France to be able to even make 38 rimfire cartridges. And 38 rimfire cartridges nowadays are specially milled rimfire cartridges, or essentially centerfire cartridges that have been bored out and take a 22 Flowbert 6mm blank for the primer. That's a video for a different day, and I think I might put that up as a Patreon exclusive. Channel only exists because of viewers like you supporting the channel directly. So we have no sponsors, no overlords, and if you'd like to support InRangeTV for this sort of unique and creative, hopefully you think creative content, please consider doing so at patreon.com/InRangeTV. Literally every dollar matters. If you only got $1, if you've got, maybe you want to put in 5, we have different tiers for different levels of support, but a bunch of people at $1 make a huge difference in being able to make videos like this for you. But you saw, it works fine, and it does give you at least a taste of what it would be to fire a Thuer conversion. As well as I can always flip the gun or back to the original 1851 Navy configuration by just replacing the cylinder. And that's one of the big benefits, as I said earlier, of the Thuer conversion, when some of the other factory conversions were only one way. You are now a cartridge gun and you're not a percussion gun. And on the frontier, the availability of cartridges and the wide variety of cartridges that landed hitting the market made it unlikely that you would find your particular cartridge in some remote, forlorn place in Arizona territory. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I hope you like learning a little bit about Thuer conversions and cartridge conversions. There's something that really tickled my heart, and I find it a fascinating part of firearms history. And hopefully you'll support me on patreon.com/InRangeTV, but if not, just support the channel by subscribing, share with your friends, and stay tuned for more interesting Old West firearms cartridge conversions.